Welcome back to Lift Up Garage. We got the '04 Marauder up in the air. We're starting the process of getting this car back on the road for a friend of mine. So I went ahead and pulled all the wheels because I'm going to start working on the brakes. I'm going to get all the fluids changed. In this video, I'm going to start on the brake system and everything that I need to do to flush the brake fluid and get these rotors turned and possibly put a new set of pads on so that we can get the braking system checked off our list of stuff to do. So on this side, I went ahead and got the caliper and the caliper bracket off and then took the rotor off. And when I say have these rotors turned, what they're going to do is they'll actually put it up into a lathe and then they'll apply a cutting bit to the surface that'll take these grooves out and make this rotor smooth again. Now the only caveat to that is you have to make sure that the rotor is thick enough to be turned a couple, thousandths basically, to smooth out the surface on the front and the back of the disc. This rotor, we know it's got a little warp to it, and you can see the smooth spot is where it was covered by the pad while it was in storage for a few years. Now on the inside of this, it says the minimum disc thickness is going to be 26.35 millimeters. I'll have to measure that with my caliper and then do the conversion on it. Now the rear discs, they actually have that measurement on the outside of them, and you can see this one says max drum diameter. That means the parking brake on the inside of these cars, or the parking brake for this car, is on the inside of this rotor. The minimum disc thickness, I think it says 19 millimeters. Yeah, so it says 19 millimeters, so we'll measure that. Again, you can see the smooth spot here is where it was behind the brake pad and the caliper. And then this has got a little bit of a ridge out here towards the end, but it's really not that bad. If you have a really keen eye, you'll be able to point out some of the upgrades that this car has, mainly these upper and lower control arms. This car has a tubular set of control arms. The guys that made these, what they did is they took a stock set of control arms, they laid them out on a jig, measured them, and then made them out of tubular, and then they accept the same bushings that the OEM control arms do. Now, these are no longer made. They did a run of about 30 or 40 from what I remember on the forums back in the day. And then you notice it's got like a zinc anodized sway bar back here. I believe it's an ADCO sway bar, and it's a little bit thicker than normal. So just a few of the upgrades that this thing has in the back. But what we're going to do is we'll get this disc off and we will get this turned. We'll check out the pad material, see how much is left. I think we're going to go ahead and do an upgrade on the pads on this vehicle just because of the upgraded supercharger, the suspension. He would benefit from a better set of pads from what is on here from the factory. I believe that's what he's still running, is the OEM pads. On the inside of the pad that actually faces the rotor, it's got this groove here, and then once you get down to the end of that groove, that's about where you're going to run out of material. Some of these pads actually have like a wear indicator, which is a little metal tab that sticks off. And then once you get it worn down so far, it makes contact with the rotor when you apply the brakes. And that's what lets you know, hey, I got to get some pads here before too long. These are a semi-metallic, and we'll probably go with those. If any of you guys have ever run ceramic brakes on these cars, they don't work too well until you get some heat in them. I have had a personal bad experience with ceramic pads. On my first Marauder, I slapped on a set of ceramics, thought it was going to be a really good idea. And until you get heat built up in them, they really don't work as good as semi-metallic. So on a Crown Vic, a Marauder, a town car, any of these Panther platform cars, to get the rotor off, you have to remove the caliper bracket. In order to remove the caliper bracket, you have to take the caliper off of the bracket. Well, you don't have to, but it sure does make life easier. So you've got two 14 millimeter head bolts that hold the caliper onto the bracket. These are the two sliders. And then once you get the caliper off, you can pop the pads out, and then you can take the caliper off with these two bolts that hold it onto the spindle in this location here. Those are 18 millimeter headed bolts, and it takes a little bit of force, and you can see it's got blue Loctite on the thread, so we'll make sure when we put this back together, we're going to put some more Loctite on there. Got my caliper out, did a real quick measurement. We're coming up with 1.1 inches, pretty much on the spot, like 1.10. So I did the conversion on that. using the Google to convert this into millimeters. What it comes out to be is about 27.94 millimeters. So 1.1 inches, 27.94. And the minimum thickness on this was 26.35. So we are good to have these turned. We'll get these front rotors turned. I'm going to measure the other side once I get it off, but I would imagine it would be about the same. And then we'll take these up to O'Reilly's or some other auto parts store that has a brake lathe and have these turned. All right, we got the driver's side off and went ahead and measured this rotor too. And it specs out to 1.1 inches or, you know, the same 27.95 millimeters. So still plenty of meat left on these rotors to be turned. We're gonna get the rear ones off. The rear rotors are off after a little persuasion. They did not want to come off the end of the axle. I mean, they've been on there for 51,000 miles. So it just took a little bit of persuasion, a little bit of heat and tapping with a dead blow hammer. And eventually the rotor came off. One of the cool things about it is it still had those little clips that go over the lugs here, over the studs, and that holds the rotor on in place. So I've got the driver side is off, the passenger side is off, and I've measured the passenger side. I'm about to set this up on the bench and measure it. So I was a little wrong about the measurement. I really couldn't see it. This says the minimum rotor thickness is 18 millimeters. I've already measured the passenger side. It came out to be 0.755 inches, which works out to be 19.1 millimeters. So we still got another millimeter of meat, if you want to say, material left on this rotor. I'm going to go ahead and measure this driver's side and see what it comes out. So I got the passenger side rear here, driver's side rear. Just measured it real quick. We're at, again, pretty much 755 inches, 0.755 inches. So we're well within the minimums of getting all of these rotors turned. So I'll find O'Reilly's around here that'll turn these. They're usually about 10 to 15 bucks a piece. We'll get all these rotors turned, get them nice and smooth, and then we'll figure out what pads we're gonna run. I really wanna look into something like a Hawk or an EBC pad, more performance oriented for the spirited driving that this car deserves. Whether he'll do it or not, I'm not sure, but at least we'll have some pads and rotors to back it up. While I wait for the machine shop or the O'Reilly's to get those rotors turned and back straight, I'm going to start on the next project that I need to do under the hood. These Eaton superchargers are notorious for a coupler in here going bad and making a little bit of noise, and this may or may not do it. I haven't even turned it yet. Went ahead and got the bolt off, or the belt, I'm sorry. There's a tensioner right here that holds that supercharger belt. And honestly, this thing is tight. When these couplers go bad, what basically you'll have is some backlash on these gears. So you got your input here from the supercharger belt. There's a coupler inside of here, 2 gears that are attached to the rotors, and then there's 2 bearings at the very back of the case too. You'll hear slop in this. I don't hear any slop. This turns very freely. There's a little bit of resistance on it, but it's not excessive resistance. This to me feels good. This is well within spec. So I'll check with him to see if he was wanting this coupler replaced just as a preventative, or if he actually heard some noise in it. I'll go ahead and take this plug out right here. I've got some paper towels laid here. I'm gonna go ahead and change the oil in this snout. It's recommended to change it every 25 to 30,000 miles. You just use SA30 oil, not like 5W30 or anything like that. These use SAE, which doesn't have the winter additives in it because it's not really going to get as hot as an internal combustion engine will. I mean, it'll get, you know, obviously bolted to the intake manifold, but it's not going to get the wear and tear on the oil that the engine oil does. So this doesn't need all those extra additives. So SAE30, I think that's what GM used on the 3.8 liters. Ford used it on the M90 Eaton superchargers on like the Super Coupes and the XR7 Cougars with the same style supercharger. So that's what we'll change this one for. A drain plug fought me coming out. It's actually supposed to be a 3/16 Allen head bit that goes in there. I tried that, it wanted to strip, so I stepped up to a 5mm. and kind of pounded it in there and got it out. So that needs to be replaced, which I wanted to replace it anyways because of the rust that was forming. Originally this was black painted on the outside, but they make some stainless steel units like this that have a magnetic insert in the back of the plug, which this does not have a magnet. So anytime you get a magnet in there, that's going to be a lot better. It's going to collect any shavings. So I've got some of the oil out, as you can see here, and it is super dark. It definitely needs to be changed. So we're going to get this out the rest of the way. I just need to find a little container to dump this oil into. If he wants to send it off and have it analyzed or something like that, I'll just hold on to it for a little bit, not just dump it straight into the normal used oil container that I have. So we'll hold off on that. I'll get the rest of this oil out. It was a little bit of a mess when you take that plug out. It dribbles down the front of the case and kind of all over the place. That's why I had those paper towels there, but they got soaked up really quick. So we'll work on getting the rest of the oil out and move on to the next thing. So that's the oil that came out. It's pretty dirty, pretty dark. So yeah, definitely need to be changed. We got not quite half a bottle. This is a 16.9 ounce bottle. So I think these Eaton superchargers hold anywhere between 6 and 8 ounces of oil, if I remember right. So we'll get some new oil for it. We'll get that drain plug replaced, and then we'll move on to the next thing, which the next thing that I was working on, there's a tensioner bracket right here. This is part of the Eaton supercharger adapter kit that you get. It comes with both of these brackets. This bracket holds the tensioner for the supercharger belt that goes down to the crank pulley. He had stated that this bolt right here was coming loose and that he would occasionally have to tighten that bolt. So I've already backed it out. I took a couple of quick measurements and I put it back in. See if we got it out now where I can grab it. Yeah, it's a lot looser. Well, it goes quite a way back. So it goes all the way through that bracket. And then it goes in through the timing cover into the cylinder head. So you can see this is a long bolt. It's an M8 by 150 millimeters. And it's got a little bit of anti-seize on the threads there. The problem is when you lay this up there and you actually look at the measurements on it, and then you come back here to where it would normally go through the cylinder head, it's just not going to be long enough. It really needs to be about 10 millimeters long enough to engage all the threads. So I think that's part of the issue that he was having, was it just didn't have enough thread engagement. I actually off camera put that back in and kind of looked to see where it fell on the threads and how far in it went. And I mean, really, when you put it up there to the bracket, I'll go ahead and do it again. So I'm pushing it all the way in. That's not thread engagement. That's just getting through the timing cover. There we go. You got about 10 millimeters, maybe, or 8 to 10 millimeters of threads that are actually going to engage into the cylinder head, and that's just not enough. So we'll get a longer bolt and fix that issue. When I was up here working on the supercharger and that bolt, I did notice there was a little drip on the floor of coolant, so I've gone ahead and thrown that drain plug, or that drain pan under there. The issue was from a drain plug on the heat exchanger, and this has two drains on it. There's one on the left here that has like a plastic nut, and the one on the right has a metal nut with an O-ring. And the one on the right is the one that's leaking, and I don't know if the O-ring's gone bad, if that plug is loose, or if it's just stripped out or something, but that's the one that's leaking. We'll address that in the future once I move up here to the cooling system. On this vehicle, I'm going to try to work like rear to front. So in mentioning the brake system to him and going through all the fluids, we're going to go ahead and upgrade the brake hoses on this. So I've got to get those on order. I need to order all of the fluids and the filters and all that stuff so we can get through that. The fuel filter does have a pretty good dent in it, but it's a larger filter, so I'll address that in a future video also. Thank you all so much for the support. The channel has been growing, and that's awesome. Right now we're not monetized. I'm doing this just for fun, not getting any payment out of this, and I'm doing this to help this gentleman with his car and get it back on the road. So I definitely appreciate all of the comments, all the subscribes, all the likes. It means a lot to me. Thank you all for watching. Stay tuned for the next episode. Stay gloved up.